everybody, here I am, Paul Stecewycz with Weeks Aircraft, doing another Mechanics Corner and a quick update on progress on the Bf-108. We talked about in the last video that we did about a lot about part prepping and paint removal and that subject. Basically what we've been doing on the 108 is getting the wings ready for paint removal. Now we spent a lot of time removing all the internal parts, which are all basically out. They're on the rack, all labeled. One of the last things that we needed to do before that was to remove the wing attach fittings. The 108 has these fittings. I already removed this top portion, one right here, and these fittings have to come out to be inspected. They are steel. They are apt to get rust, and also the fitting itself is bolted right up to the aluminum spar. So in that case you have steel against aluminum, which sometimes sets up dissimilar metal corrosion, so we want to also check for that. Removed most of them already. I'm down to the last pair, which is down here on the left wing lower. Kind of interesting what we had to do to get some of these out. The bolts are extremely tight. They're a very close tolerance bolt, and I'm going to remove one to show you how tight these things are. But another odd thing about this was on the top fittings, and there are two, of course, that go in here just like the bottom. The very last bolt that was up close to this butt rib, you cannot get to the bolt. You couldn't get a wrench or a socket onto the nut to loosen it, and you couldn't get anything on the head of the bolt and even turn it, because the bolt's so tight you can't even turn it. Also, once you did get the nut off and you try to drive the bolt through, the bolt would actually hit a reinforcement that's attached here. So unfortunately what I had to do is I had to drill off two reinforcements. One that's on here that goes on the back side of this piece, and the other one here goes on the back side of here. And the very end of these interfered with removing the bolt, which is a little odd. And from that I've reasoned that what they did was they probably put those fittings in, and then the last thing that they did was they actually assembled and put this butt rib onto the wing and riveted that on there. Why they did that, I'm not sure. It makes it kind of hard. If you had to remove that to get it off, it would make some more work out of it. The only way to avoid removing all that was just to remove the two reinforcements, which we were able to do. So that took a lot of time. It actually took several days to figure that out, and destroyed about 2 or 3 other bolts getting them out. We're going to replace the bolts anyways because they are wing attached, so we're going to replace that with all new bolts. But I do like to try to get the bolts out intact, and unfortunately the first 3 or 4 that I did pretty much destroyed them. But we kind of got past the learning curve and know how to get them out. And we're going to knock one of these out for you. I've already pulled the cotter pin out. The next one that's coming out of here is number 3. Down in here. I've already pulled the cotter pin, which is a trick in itself, because again, I don't know if I mentioned in other videos, the cotter pins on these airplanes were put in very, very tight, and actually when they bent the cotter pin over, they actually took the ends of the cotter pin and actually tucked them into the next groove in the castellated nut. The airplane, of course, has the bolt with the castellated nut, and the cotter pin goes through. And they actually pulled that cotter pin around and very nicely installed it. But unfortunately that was 80 years ago, and they've been sitting in there for quite a while, and it's very, very difficult to get out. Plus, on top of all that, once they assembled this whole thing, they painted everything. I find this interesting. Every single component inside the wing is painted. It doesn't help, but actually hurts trying to get a lot of this hardware out. But we got that cotter pin out of there. Next thing to do is to break the nut free. It is extremely, extremely tight. It's of course 14 millimeter. Everything's metric on the 108. We got a nice little breaker bar wrench here, and I'm not going to try to take this off with a ratchet first because we'll probably break the ratchet. We're just going to use a straight bar, and we're just going to break that free. You can see how tight that was. Now we're going to take our ratchet and then remove the nut. Trusty snap-on ratchet. Shout out to the Snap-on company. The guy comes by every Thursday and takes our money. But it's well worth it. Really nice tools. Which everybody in the shop has Snap-on. And so we got the nut out of there. It's in good shape. And then another thing they did is they put a washer, of course, on every bolt and nut. And this washer is again glued in there. You have to kind of pick it out here, and it's a very tight fit washer. You have to kind of pry it out of there. It's easy, but it's a special washer. You don't want to lose that. That'd be very difficult. It's actually got a little countersink in it for the bolt to sit in, and it's very, very thick too. It's not a standard like an AN cotter pin that you see in a lot of American airplanes. So of course we're going to save all that so we can reuse that and get it replated. Now, of course, the bolt is free to come out, and the first time I tried to do this, I thought, that's just going to knock her out of there. Took a hammer, started whacking on it, barely moved it. By the time I actually did move and got it out, I actually bent the bolt over, which made it very difficult to get it out of the hole because it was just so tight. So I've tried various different things, and I found the best thing to do was actually brute force. There's nothing like brute force, and in this case we have a rivet gun that I actually use for riveting, but in this case you can use it as an impact tool. I have just a nice flat flush set on there so we don't damage the bolt, even though we are going to replace it, but we don't want to butcher it. And I'm just going to place that in there, and I'm going to put that on the bolt, and we're just going to whack this thing out of here. That's tight. That is like one of the tightest bolts I've ever seen installed in an airplane. Now that's out loose. I'm going to take a hammer, and hammer go. There it is. You got to part way. Of course, you can't knock it all the way through. Plus, I don't want to damage the fitting with the rivet gun, because if you're not careful, if you slip off or you go any further than that, you could damage the fitting. So right now, I'm just gonna knock that out of there. So that comes out of there nice. And of course now we have our bolt. And even that little bit of impacting, actually, it has a tendency to want to mess up the threads. But, like I said before, we are going to replace all that. But we're going to keep all this together and label it so we know exactly what size bolts we need, although the book does tell us all that, but I like to have the original part for reference. So once that's out, what does it look like? Well, that's actually one of the pieces that we pulled off of the left wing upper rear. Of course, we're going to label these and keep them in their bag because you don't want to swap these around. I talked to somebody that actually worked on a 108. They pulled all these out of the wings thinking that they were all basically the same, because when you put them next to each other, they look the same. But as they put them back in the airplane, they just thought they just went anywhere. They found that nothing lined up. So that, of course, tells us that each fitting was probably drilled and reamed in place, probably. So we don't want to mix these things up. And the bad thing about this is, once you get it out, this has to go through two processes. And during this process, I need to keep these separate from each other so they don't get all mixed up. The first thing that has to be done, of course, it got bead blasted to knock off all the old paint. And the plating, it looks very nice. Nice piece. Interesting thing, that it has actually a little bushing that the pin goes through. Of course, we talked about earlier in the videos, the 108 has folding wings, and so when you put the wing in place, it has a little lever that pushes over and a big pin comes through and goes into the fitting. Well, the fitting has a little bronze bushing, and the Germans were very clever here in that it actually is threaded. So if this wears out, which it will over time, you just unthread it and thread a new one in instead of having to press it out. So that's pretty clever. So that's out, it's cleaned up. Next step is to send it off for NDT, which is non-destructive testing. Now this is something we can't do here. We can do some of that here, but it's better to take it to a professional place that'll actually go and go through non-destructive testing and actually yellow tag that part and make it airworthy and make sure that there is no cracks in this piece, because of course that's not one thing you don't want to have is cracks in your wing attach pieces. Now once that's finished, it's going to come back and it's going to go out for CAD plating. And then once it's CAD plated, it'll get painted, because these were painted originally as everything was inside the wing. So that's the process for the wing attach fittings. Kind of interesting. It just took a lot of time to get those out of there, but it kind of gives you an idea of how long it takes to get just the simplest thing out of one of these airplanes. Next thing we're going to talk about is a couple things doing on the fuselage. We're getting to the point on the wings where they're ready for paint strip. And I'm sort of running out of things to do on the wings until we get to that point. So I've been kind of looking at the fuselage. So let's go over and check the fuselage out and a few things that we're taking care of on there. Alright, here we are at the fuselage of the 108. We're just kind of tinkering with a few things here, and one of the things I was concerned about on the 108 is the wheels. Like a lot of World War II aircraft, even American airplanes, the wheel itself is magnesium. There's a lot of magnesium in the airplane overall, but I know these are mag wheels. So I was concerned that there was going to be some big corrosion issues, because I'm sure it's probably not easy to find a set of original wheels. So if I did find corrosion, I wanted to know that now so I can start to search for a good set of wheels. So basically this is what it looks like here. As you can see, it's in pretty rough shape. The tire that's on it, which is not an original tire, but it's a tire that was probably placed on it probably back in the 50s or the 60s, it's all gone, of course. It has to be replaced. You can see the wheel exposed with its original black paint. The wheels on the 108 were all painted black, just from photographs that I've seen, so it's kind of cool to see the original paint. No one's messed with that. So the first thing we do is remove the wheel cover. There are covers on the 108, and these are kind of interesting, pretty involved. The cover, I've actually stripped the paint off it. It's already had a ton of paint like the rest of the airplane. The backside was bare and has some kind of ID number somebody crayoned on there or painted on there, so I'm going to try to save that. But it has some minor dents on it. Rick worked that out for me. We're going to give those a good sanding out and some primer, filling primer, kind of smooth those pieces out. They're good usable pieces. One thing that wasn't usable are the little data plates. It had very interesting on each, in this little round area here, it had a data plate for the manufacturer of the wheel cover itself. And right down here on these two small holes below the air valve here, that's actually the grease valve, this is the air valve, was a little placard that gave you tire pressures. Well, the original pieces, as I removed them, not in very good condition. As you can see, that's the main wheel cap data plate, which is corroded and you can't hardly even read it. It was originally black background with silver lettering, and of course the other data plate for tire pressures is basically the same condition, so it's pretty rough. Now, I could have sourced these, but I actually found out I don't think there's anybody making these. So what do you do in that case? It's kind of a hard thing to find items like, you know, original German placard. Well, guess what? There's actually people that do this. There's a company called Air Corps Aviation up in Minnesota. Give a shout out to these guys. They've helped us out with a lot of different things, and they actually have somebody on staff that does special artwork for these restorations. Now if you need a placard made, a water transfer decal, or a sticker, because there was a lot of these informational stickers that were on these airplanes, they actually have someone that sits down, if they have the original drawing or the original piece, they do the artwork, they figure out the size, they give you a quote, and they actually remake the placard. So that's what I did. I sent these off to Air Corps, and they came back. And of course, they are beautiful. There's the original piece right there, actually a replacement piece. It's a really cool logo. That's the company that produced the wheel cover, Stuttgart, Germany. But they did that, and they also did the placard for the wheel pressure. Same exact script and everything. They go right down and do this detail work. Unfortunately, this is very, very costly. To have the artwork done and to have two of these made is $600. So it gets pretty pricey pretty quick. But again, that's going to be really cool when it's all finished, because of course when the hubcap wheel cover is all painted, and you're going to put that nice new placard on there. Those are the little touches that always make a restoration. Of course, if you put the original on there, or if you didn't put it on there at all, that just looks nasty. So going through the effort and the money to have that produced is always good. Now once that's been taken off, we're going to pull the wheel off. I did this to the other side, and we want to check the bearings. And another thing I wanted to make sure was that the bearings were okay, because the 108 has some very interesting wheel bearings. I have never seen a wheel bearing like that. This is so German. It's got these little grooves in it, these little roller bearings all the way on there. Surprised I took them out in perfect condition. Cleaned them up. They still had nice grease in them. Those are going to be reusable, because I think that would be a very, very hard item to find. Still stamped made in Germany on it, so that's good news that was in good condition. And then the wheel itself, once I took it off, put it in the plastic medium machine, which we talked about in the last video about removing paint. It works good on magnesium. And we stripped the wheel, and to my surprise, the wheel is perfect. Absolutely perfect. It has no corrosion. I could not even believe how nice this was. No corrosion at all. It's the little grease fitting. Bearing, of course, goes up inside there. The back side, nice and clean. Even the drum This airplane has shoe brakes, and even the drum itself is in good condition. There's a little bit of light corrosion on here. And of course, before we paint this, it goes through a little bit of a treating. There's a special product you can put on magnesium to prep it for paint. But that'll be done. It'll be primed and painted black, and then we're ready to go. Now the next thing was, after that's finished, is tires. Now you can get a new tire to fit this, but if you look at a lot of pictures of 108s, they have this really cool German tire, and I always said to myself, man, it'd be really cool to find a set of those tires. Well, amazingly enough, I found somebody that had one of these tires, and hopefully I can find a second one. But this is actually this just blew me away when I found this. This is an original Bf-108 tire, brand new, and I'm hoping I can be able to use that. The guy that found this, he's trying to find a second one, because this just makes the look of the airplane. I love this tread design that's on the wheel. It just makes it so German, so 108. So amazing enough we found that. So once we get the wheel painted, we're going to mount that tire. We're going to paint our wheel cover. We're going to put those brand new data plates on there, and when it's all said and done, it's just going to be perfect. It's going to be like all the pictures that you see on these airplanes. So once that gets finished, we're going to show it to you in one of the next videos. One of the other things that we're looking at also is the fuel tanks in the wing. The 108 has 5 fuel tanks. It has a main tank that's back in the tail, and then it has 2 tanks on each side in this little kind of stub wing that comes out from the fuselage. So what we did here is we removed the fairing. There's a big fairing that attaches on here with just some screws. Took that off. That's in pretty good condition. There's a small repair we have to make to that. And then once that's opened up, you see these 2 tanks that are just squeezed in there. They try to get the most fuel capacity they could on the 108, and by squeezing these tanks in there, the original felt lining is still intact. The straps that hold the tank are still there. Those are tightened up through a nut that goes through. You have access through there, and on this side, access in the hole back here to tighten those straps up. So those are going to come out of there. And the reason we want to do that, of course, is to inspect the tank itself to make sure that it's in good condition. Also to inspect the area underneath the tank. This is a lot of air where the main spar is, where the wing attached fittings are in the fuselage. All this has to be inspected and looked at. Paint has to be removed from this area to check for any kind of corrosion. So I kind of wanted to dig into that a little bit to make sure there's no surprises under that. One of the things they put on here is also these little pieces of wood. I'm not sure if these are original or not. They're pretty rough looking pieces, but they could be. These were placed here because there's a walkway here to get into the airplane, and I think they were trying to stop the fairing from getting crushed and damaging the tank. So they put these 2 little pieces of wood, which are pretty crude in those areas there, but they might be original. So we're gonna retain those. Of course, before the tanks come out, lines have to be disconnected. There's a couple of little suck drains underneath that have to be removed. But what's very interesting about these 2 tanks is the only way to fill these is through the main tank. There's no filler caps on these tanks. You actually have to go to the main tank, fill it, and then gravity feeds to these tanks. And I've talked to a few people that have dealt with the airplane. They said it's one of the things on the 108 that's a little difficult. It takes some time to fill the airplane because you have to fill it and you have to listen for the fuel to trickle down inside of these tanks, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of odd that they just didn't choose to put filler next here, but I guess they wanted to keep this area nice and clean. So that's basically how you fuel the 108 is through the main tank. So it probably takes a little bit longer than most airplanes. But we're going to get those out of there, do the same thing to the other side, make sure there's no damage, no corrosion, and then we'll go from there. But that's basically what we're doing. I haven't done a whole lot on the airplane over the past couple of months, but we are kind of getting back into it again here and make some progress. Hopefully the next time we do a video is going to be on removing the paint off the wings. That's the next big step, because once the paint's removed, we can start drilling off some skins and start going inside the wing and clean that up and get it all ready for paint prep. Hope you enjoyed the video. Keep asking all those questions and comments, and come back and check out another video on the 108.